Do you want to wield powerful magics, are prone to signing dark pacts, or enjoy enlisting those who've retired from this mortal coil for your own ends? Well, Warlocks are one of the classes that play the caster role in your party by doing big damage and handling large groups of enemies. But unlike a wizard who can choose from a vast array of spells, or a sorcerer who can manipulate those spells to be more versatile, Warlocks have a more defined and limited but powerful approach to spell casting. So if that sounds good to you, here's a full guide to the Warlock class for Baldur's Gate 3 Tactician mode, including all the class mechanics, suggestions for your progression, some nice items to look for early on, the playstyle and strategy for difficult encounters, and a build that uses some Warlock and Sorcerer multi-classing. If this video does help you or you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe. Now let's get into the character creation. You can play Warlock as an origin character, Wyll, because he's by story a Warlock, and if it's your first playthrough, that will provide you much more content. But as a human, you're not getting too many bonuses to your class. If you want a more custom character, an Asmodeus Tiefling is a good choice because they can access the Darkness spell later on, which will be useful to the build, and can help you to conserve your spell slots. The two cantrips you want are Eldritch Blast, which is your main bread butter skill, and Minor Illusion, which is great for manipulating enemies to group up before you engage them in a fight, or to lure suspicious bystanders away while you perform dirty deed. Both of these spells are cantrips, so you can use them as many times as you want with an action point. There are more powerful spells than these that we'll get, but believe it or not, you'll be spamming Eldritch Blast for most of the game, which to be honest, never get tired of seeing this animation. For the subclass, you can take the Fiend if you want to learn more destructive spells later, and Extra Barrier when getting kills can help you sustain fights, and this is what you'll start out as when you play Wyll, but you can re-roll him later to another subclass. Fey Warlock is more about charms and illusions, but this isn't too interesting. I like to run the Great Old One subclass, because it attempts to frighten enemies near your target when you land a critical hit. Frighten stops enemies in place and gives them disadvantage on attack rolls, making it great utility for controlling the battlefield, not only to keep your enemies in all of your area of effect spells, but also to keep them from advancing on your allies. And for me, the point of a Warlock is to maintain this control, not to necessarily be the main damage source, but to facilitate it. So I like the Great Old One for this, and later on we'll get a lot more critical chance to make this stronger, but as I said, the Fiend is also a viable option for this build. For now, go for Armor of Agathys and Hex as your two spell slot spells. Armor of Agathys gives you barrier, and when enemies attack you in melee range, they take damage, and this lasts until your barrier runs out. This isn't great at first, but it can give you some extra health to prevent you from being easily focused. Warlock spell slots work differently from other classes' spell slots. You only get 1, 2, or 3 of them, which is quite a limited amount, but they recharge on a short rest instead of on a long rest, and all of your spells will always be cast at the highest level spell possible. So for example, Armor of Agathys gives 5 barrier and deals 5 damage at level 1, but once you earn level 2 Warlock spell slots, casting Armor of Agathys automatically ranks it up to give 10 barrier and 10 damage dealt, and 15 at level 3. Other classes don't necessarily scale like this unless they want to expend more resources. Warlocks get a lot of value from using spells that do scale up like this. We'll go over more spell distinctions later, but just know that for now, you want to be conservative with your spells. Use Hex, which will mark your targets to take bonus damage from your attacks. Just hex them with strength and finish them off. And if you don't lose your concentration, you can reapply it for free without using another spell slot. Charisma is your most important ability because it's what your spells and cantrips scale off of. So max out Charisma, then put 14 into Constitution for a bit more health and higher rolls on Constitution saving throws, which are what prevent your concentration skills from being interrupted. Since you have limited spell slots, if one of your powerful concentrations gets interrupted, you may not have the resources to cast it again. Then just put the rest of your abilities to even numbers, since those are the cutoff for roll modifiers. Wisdom and Dexterity are probably better candidates here. Now, as Eldritch Blast will probably be your most used skill throughout the entire playthrough, I suggest putting it on a keybind in the custom skill bar. Just place that on 1 and you'll have easy access to spam it. At level 2, you get your second Warlock spell slot, Get used to this because you won't get another for a while. Conserve and plan out your short and long rests. And if you have a bard in your party, they can provide an extra short rest for your spell slots. For your new spell, you can go for some AoE, since we only have single target damage from the Eldritch Blast otherwise. And although Warlocks only get a few spell slots, they can replace a spell each level, which means when your old spells that don't scale with spell slots become outdated, you can replace them with new higher level spells that will make use of the full potential of your level. But for now, we still have level 1 spell slots, so no need to replace. You'll also get to choose between 2 Eldritch Invocations. Don't worry, if you want more of these, we'll be able to pick up more later. But for now, we're going to get Repelling and Agonizing Blast, which will increase your Eldritch Blast damage and allow you to knock enemies back with it, which is extremely powerful not only because positioning is key in Baldur's Gate, but also because you can potentially knock enemies off of high ground for massive fall damage. Level 3 improves Warlock spell slots to their 2nd level, and we get access to a bunch of new spells. Take Cloud of Daggers, because it's the best damaging spell at this level. You don't roll a dice to deal damage with, so it's great early on before you get your attack rolls higher. It pulses damage every turn an enemy stands in it, and to enemies who pass through it, making it great for creating choke points. Before a fight, you can bunch up groups of enemies with Minor Illusion, and then throw a Cloud of Daggers on them to get a good head start on their health bars. Though later on it doesn't scale as well. We can also replace Burning Hands or another level 1 spell slot, since we now have a better AoE spell, and instead we'll take Darkness. This obscures the vision of anyone in or out of it, and will blind anyone inside it, making their attacks have disadvantage, and attacks against them have advantage. However, since ranged characters can't see you inside the darkness unless they have magical dark vision, they won't be able to do damage to you, so you can go in the darkness at the end of your turn to use it as line of sight, and then when your turn begins, move out to make your Eldritch Blast, and then go back in. Melee characters can still run up to you and hit you, so positioning is important here. Also remember that this is a concentration, and so is Cloud of Daggers. You'll need to choose which one you use because you can't have 2 concentrations up at once. Also, level 3 gives us access to a Pact Boon. This gives bonuses later on as well, but at level 3, Pact of the Chain allows you to summon a variety of pets, which can be very useful early on, which we won't really get to do with this build. Pact of the Blade is more for a weapon hybrid warlock, so instead we'll go for Pact of the Tome. At level 3, this gives Guidance, which is one of the best cantrips in the game for dialogues. This pact seems underwhelming at first, but at level 5 is when you really see its benefits. Now's a good time to start thinking about getting some warlock items. One of the best items you can get early on, which you'll use for many levels after, is the Spell Sparkler. You get this as a quest reward for saving Counselor Floric from the burning building in Joaquin's Rest. All you need to do is break the door open with a strength check, or just use your weapon. Then go upstairs and break open the boarding from one of the doorways and escort her out. Very easy quest that requires no combat, so you could potentially get this as soon as you leave the tutorial. This weapon gives you lightning charges whenever you deal damage with a spell or cantrip, and lightning charges give you higher attack rolls, and your spells will deal extra lightning damage the more you keep getting those charges. You might be thinking, why would I want attack rolls with spells? And believe me, I was confused on this for a while. Some spells use attack rolls, and some spells use difficulty class. Each spell is different, and you need to check the tooltip. Attack rolls will use the enemy armor class to decide if it hits, and difficulty class is divided even further into specific abilities such as dexterity and wisdom saving throws. Knowing all this can be complicated, but just know that Eldritch Blast is an attack roll spell, and therefore these lightning charges are extremely good for improving your Eldritch Blast even further the more you use it, so just spam away. But even further than that, if you cast Hex on a target, it does extra damage per instance of damage, and the lightning charges each trigger their own Hex, making your Eldritch Blast do insane damage to single targets. But once again, Hex is a concentration, so decide whether you want to blast single targets, or use Cloud of Daggers for multiple targets. At level 4 you get another cantrip. Blade Ward is often not better than using your action to dash or disengage, so the only options here are Mage Hand, which is a nice utility summon for many different situations, especially because we took the Pact of the Tome, so we don't have any other summons just yet. Or you can get Friends for even more dialogue advantages. Just be careful with that because enemies might get mad that you've attempted to charm them. I'll go for the Mage Hand though. Then we get another level 2 spell, Take Misty Step for unrivaled mobility or mirror images, which makes the next 3 attacks against you have an increasingly higher chance to miss per mirror image left. Then we get a feat. The best options to go for are charisma upgrades for now because so many damaging spells scale with it, and it's going to give you better dialogue success too. But there's 3 options you can go for. Since we're at 17 charisma, you can go for performer or actor, which would give you 1 charisma to get you the 18 charisma cutoff, and then choose whether you like to persuade or perform a musical instrument. But if those aren't important to you at all, just go for ability improvement and stick 2 in charisma, which would put you at 19, which is the same as 18 in terms of mechanics, but you'd be 1 closer to the 20 cutoff if you can get an extra bonus later on. Now level 5 is when things get crazy. All damaging cantrips, regardless of multi-classing, are going to be upgraded at this level. And Eldritch Blast doesn't just get double damage, it gets 2 beams which you can point at different targets. This means you have the ability to knock back 2 different targets, or you can blast 1 even harder for twice as many chances to crit, and enable the Mortal Reminder Frighten. We also get access to level 3 spells. Choose Hunger of Hadar, which will create a huge blinding field that will slow all inside it, and deal damage to them at the beginning and end of their turn. It exerts massive control in an encounter, especially if you can bunch them up with a minor illusion beforehand. They can't see out of the field, and they can't get out because they're slowed. And even though you can't normally see inside the darkness, we can still hit them because we get the Eldritch Invocation Devil's Sight at this level. This allows you to lock down your enemies with Hunger of Hadar, and then pelt them with Eldritch Blast to knock them back into the darkness or frighten them when they try to leave. Also, since you have advantage against enemies who are blinded, your double Eldritch Blast will also roll 2 dice due to advantage, and that means you have 4 dice rolls to land a critical hit to frighten your enemies. And while this isn't too common yet, we'll get a higher crit chance to really make this shine later on. Replace Cloud of Daggers at this point because Hunger of Hadar is a much better spell to use our spell slots on, and we can now get the level 3 counterspell, which can prevent any spell from happening as a reaction. You don't want to use this reaction too often though, because it will deplete your spell slots very quickly. But having the option to stop an enemy casting a huge paralyze or fireball on you will make a huge difference when it does happen. Also, the pact we've chosen advances. Since we've chosen the Pact of the Tome, we now get 3 spells we can use once per long rest outside of our spell slot resource. There's Animate Dead to summon another ally, Call Lightning, which is a great AoE spell that you can recast every turn so long as you keep up that concentration. But since there are plenty other concentration spells we have, save this for after you've run out of spell slots. Then Haste is a risky but high reward spell. It's a concentration for 10 turns that gives you or another ally 2 actions per turn and much more movement speed. But if you lose the concentration, you become lethargic and lose your next turn. If you can maintain good positioning, you can cast Eldritch Blast twice per turn, but you can't have Hunger of Hadar up and Haste since they're both concentrations. So if you want the maximum potential on crits on Eldritch Blast, you need to use a Potion of Speed. Another great item to get is the Amulet of Misty Step. This one's in the Goblin Sanctum. Just go into Priestess Gut's room and it's in the chest behind an ogre. Being able to reposition without wasting spell slots or getting hit by attacks of opportunity is very powerful and lets you maintain control on the battlefield for longer before the enemy finally rushes you and you get threatened. Later on, when you get to the Githyanki Creche, the Quartermaster there sells the Daredevil Gloves, which increase your spell attack rolls by 1, so basically a 5% increased chance to hit, and you don't suffer a hit penalty when attacking enemies in melee range. So you can much more easily defend yourself by pushing enemies away from you with your Eldritch Blast, though you may need to toggle it off sometimes because it reduces your range. Level 6 is when things start to slow down on Warlock. You don't get many upgrades unless you invest a lot more in levels, so at this point we can go multi-class into Sorcerer. This does mean that by max level we'll be a little bit more of a Sorcerer than a Warlock, but essentially you're using the Sorcerer abilities to enhance your Warlock spells. Get a couple cantrips that you like and then get Mage Armor, which gives you some extra armor class if you're wearing only clothing like robes, so it lets you get a bit more survivability and it lasts permanently until long rest. Then take Shield, which is a reaction that you can spend a spell slot on to increase your armor class for the rest of that turn. And this will help not only for survival, but also to avoid damage to upkeep your concentrations. Then for subclass, I like Storm Sorcerer for a little bit more mobility and lightning damage, but you can go any of them you feel like. We get meta magics as a sorcerer, and at level 7, you want to learn Twin Spell, which allows you to take 2 targets on a spell. Not all spells work with this, and higher level spells cost more, so at first you can't do much with this. Then get Careful Spell just in case you need some extra defense. The resource used for these meta magics is sorcery points, and you can interchange them with spell slots as well if you don't want to enhance your spells. This allows you to get many more spell slots to use your powerful Warlock spells. At level 8 or Sorcerer level 3, you can go for even more defense with mirror images because it doesn't compete with other concentrations, so it can stack to give you a lot more avoidance and keep up your Hunger of Hadar or haste, but it's ultimately up to you. Then we want to get Quicken Spell as our third meta magic. This lets you use a bonus action to cast a spell that would normally cost an action. This can either let you ramp up your damage faster, or you can do big combos in one turn that you weren't able to do before. But most of the time you'll probably just spam an extra Eldritch Blast because that's what we do. At 9 or 4 in Sorcerer, we get some more spells that aren't too interesting for a level 9 character, but what you do want is your feat. I choose Spell Sniper here for the increased critical hit chance. It's basically 5% more crit chance, which doesn't sound amazing, but since we're rolling so many dice with advantage on blinded enemies, multiple hits of Eldritch Blast, that 5% really scales up, so we can frighten enemies very often. Level 10 is when the game pretty much ends because you reach critical mass. Regardless of what class level or multi-class you are, all cantrips get increased again, and this makes Eldritch Blast send out 3 blasts, so we're scaling very hard. Also, you want to grab Fireball from the level 3 Sorcerer spell slots. You can also replace for Counterspell, but at this time you have level 3 Warlock spell slots and level 3 Sorcerer spell slots, which can be used interchangeably. What you do after this point doesn't really matter since power creep sets in and you'll destroy no matter what. But at level 12, you can get Wall of Fire, which is one of my favorite spells. It just does so much damage, but it doesn't help control your enemies, and they can just run through it, so it sometimes doesn't do much, and it also takes up a concentration, so unless you already have a good amount of control in your party, it's just better to use Hunger of Hadar. I feel like that's the best role of a Warlock. If you wanted to go for more AoE damage, go for the Fiend subclass, then go for 7 in Warlock initially instead of going for 5 and then going into Sorcerer, because the Fiend subclass gets you Wall of Fire at level 7, which would be the soonest you could get it. Then go 5 into Sorcerer after that. Place those walls of fire down and knock enemies back into them with your Eldritch Blast if you can. I was using this build in a solo and duo tactician run, and it seemed to perform well even while underleveled because it allowed me to kite, helped handle a few enemies at a time, and even protected my allies. I know most people are running a Sorcerer Warlock build sorta like this one, but there's a good reason for it. It's effective, fun, bypasses many of the weaknesses of Warlock, and doesn't force you to wait until the game's almost over before you start feeling its effect. But that's just how I play Warlock. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, like the video, check out my other Baldur's Gate 3 videos, and subscribe so you can see when I come out with my next class guide. I think a Battle Mage Cleric might be next, or maybe a Monk. Anyways, enjoy your Warlock, and I'll see you all next time.